Hi class. Today's book that we're going to read is called Critter Sitter by Chuck Richards. Your critter sitter reporting for duty, announced Henry to Mr. and Mrs. Mahoney, his very first customers. They were picking up their kids from Camp Yippee Yahoo. Now Henry, warned Mrs. Mahoney, our snake is an escape artist. So keep that dumbbell on top of his tank. Don't worry about a thing, assured Henry. Critter Sitter is my name and critter control is my game. Slobberchops wasn't the brainiest beast on the planet, but he immediately befriended Henry. Little Miss Perfect considered herself the queen of cats and had no need for babysitters. The boa constrictor just flicked his forky tongue at Henry from behind the glass. Slobberchops, that's a funny name. That evening, the dog took the critter sitter for a run around the block, whizzing past gloomy mansion at the top of the hill. Mrs. Angora lived alone in that creepy house, and all the neighborhood kids thought she was very weird. When they got home from their walk, Henry closed Slobberchops in the laundry room and then made sure all the other animals were settled in for the night. "See you later, alligator," screeched Peepers, the cockatoo, as Henry left for home. Early the next morning, the critter sitter was greeted by two goopy blue paws flopping onto his shoulders. "Ew, get off of me, you big doofus. How did you get out of the laundry room anyway?" Henry followed the blue dog tracks leading into the dining room. Holy smokes! The snake's aquarium was open and empty. All clues pointed to Slobberchops as the culprit. A queasy feeling flooded over Henry. Would a snake eat a cat? Or a dog? Or a kid? What do you think? Is that boa constrictor going to eat someone? Henry immediately checked the sinks, the bathtub, and the toilet. Then he followed the slimy trail into the laundry room. It was a disaster area. Henry dragged the dog out of the garage so he could clean up the mess. An hour later, Henry was ready to give the dog a bath. Little Miss Perfect yowled as Slobberchops shook, spraying sheets of soapy water everywhere. The wet critter sitter was relieved to see that she hadn't become a snack for the snake. Breakfast was late, so Henry opened the can of Kitty Delight. Next, he cracked open the box of crickets to feed Flip, the tree frog. While he lifted the tank lid, the cat knocked the crickets off the counter. "Oh, this is just great," cried Henry. Suddenly, Flip escaped through the open lid as Slobberchops jumped up and unlatched the door, barreling down the block in a hot pursuit of a bunny he saw gazing in the yard. The dog chased the rabbit up the hill through Mrs. Angora's iron gate. No kid ever dared to step foot on the property before. Henry raced around a hedge and stopped dead. It was a rabbit's paradise. "Roof, roof, roof," barked Slobberchops, and the rabbits scattered. Soon, the pooch's paws were digging holes so fast that they were a blur. Henry was fumbling to clip the leash of the dog's collar when Mrs. Angora appeared with a pair of sharp, shimmering shears. We were just leaving," he stammered as he somersaulted backwards over the bloodhound. "The frog and the snake have both escaped." His fear gave him strength to drag the dog away. "What a very, very strange little boy," Mrs. Angora said to herself. Back at the house, Henry stumbled back into the tub with a muddy mutt. Little Miss Perfect yowled as Slobberchop shook, 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 spraying sheets of soapy water everywhere. "That's it," scolded Henry. "You're grounded, buddy boy." And he marched the dog back to the garage. The kitchen was crawling with crickets. Henry got down on his hands and knees to track the snake and the frog when he noticed something move overhead. Slinky was hanging from a curtain rod over the bird's now empty cage. Henry's head spun as he imagined the nightmarish version. The notorious critter sitter was on trial. His crime, animal neglect in the first degree. Prosecutor Perfect's hissing cross-examination convinced everyone of his guilt. A jury of crickets chanted, "Exterminate, exterminate, exterminate." Judge Slobberchop sentenced Henry to the maximum sentence, 525 dog years in prison without parole. Suddenly, the convicted jailbird was being tormented by a feathered prison guard that pecked at the cage with its sharp, shiny beak. Henry was jolted back to reality by an ear-splitting crash and clatter in the garage where he found the bucket-headed bloodhound. Henry lugged the smelly beast down the hall and into the tub. Little Miss Perfect yowled as Slobberchop shook, 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 spraying sheets of soapy water everywhere. Just then, Henry heard a familiar squawk. "Pretty bird, pretty bird, pretty bird." A freaky feather-tailed puppet waddled down the hall. A spooked Slobberchops knocked over the fishbowl, hurling Bubbles the goldfish through the air in a spectacular swan dive. Little Miss Perfect prepared to pounce, but the critter sitter leapt over her, heroically snatching the fish, and put her into the shiny white toilet bowl. Henry went through the house, swabbing all the floors clean. He had just refilled the fishbowl when he heard the toilet start to flush. Henry bolted into the bathroom, plunged his hand deep into the bowl, and saved Bubbles from being sucked down into the gurgling grave. Henry scowled and hissed at the cat culprit through the clenched teeth. "You're a little Miss Pain in the Neck." "See you later, alligator." Henry returned to the kitchen just in time to watch Slinky disappear down the drain. Henry grabbed a hold of the snake and tugged with all his might. Finally, the reptile surrendered and was pulled free. Exhausted, Henry and Slinky collapsed on the floor. A cricket suddenly landed on Henry's nose and flopped over to finish his feast. Henry slowly reached into the cabinet and quietly grabbed a shiny spaghetti strainer. Taking aim, he clanked the cookware down on his head, then carefully reached under to capture the tree frog. Henry heard a car turning into the driveway. The Mahoneys were back. Peepers hopped across the counter onto the dining room table. "Great," Henry moaned. "I'll never catch that pesky bird." He unwound the snake from his neck, put him in his tank, and put the dumbbell back on top just as the front door opened. Becky and Bobby Mahoney ran inside as Slobberchops charged towards the door. There was so much commotion that only Henry heard Peeper squawk, "See you later, alligator." The bird swooped back into the cage and closed the door with her hooked beak as everyone spilled into the kitchen. Mrs. Mahoney looked around and smiled as she opened her purse. "You've done a fine job, Henry. It sure seems like you've kept everything under control here." Critter control is my game," replied Henry sheepishly.